Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, home of these aggressive tiger bass. And today we've got a special treat for you as we're going to be exploring these ponds through the eyes of a blue crab. That's right, we're going to be strapping a tiny camera on a crab as he takes a dive underwater and gives us a unique experience to see what it's like living with these tiger bass, but also to see the pond from a different perspective than we've ever seen it before. But that's not all, we're also going to be adding a camera to a tilapia. And if you've missed these previous videos in this series, it's something we've enjoyed doing in the past because it's almost like you're living a day in the life of that particular species. And one of my personal favorites was when we mounted a camera to the back of this small turtle. This little guy was just as happy as could be as he cruised down the beach area, entering the pond for the first time, and then making his first attempts to go to the deeper water, where he was approached by a bass, and then got spooked and had to head for shallow water. But that's one of the reasons we chose a blue crab for today, is because as these tiger bass have gotten older, they've become more and more aggressive. And Oliver can attest to that. A couple of weeks ago, he was playing in the water at the pond, and for the first time ever, we had a bass come up and strike him. But I felt like we needed to match the aggressiveness of these bass, and there's none other better to do that than the blue crab. They're equipped with those big pinchers on the front, and they should easily be able to defend themselves. And that's a good thing because it's almost a guarantee that at some point these crabs are going to get tested by the bass. Because after all, they're a little territorial and always a little skeptical of new species coming into their home. Alright, it's time to get started, and as you can see, it's not going to be simple strapping a camera on these guys when they're this active. So the best thing to do is put them on ice for about 30 minutes, and it basically just puts them to sleep. Alright, it's time to strap this tiny camera on the blue crab, and just by the makeup of a blue crab, you can see that all of his legs are over here on the side, so we can't wrap the camera strap around this way, so we're going to have to go back to front. But the good thing about a crab is his eyes are all the way out here, so we can put that strap right down through the center, over his back, mount the camera on top. I better make sure to get all this done before he wakes up, because it would become much more difficult with the pinchers after you. Alright folks, we are strapped and ready. The last thing I did is tie this fishing line onto a fishing pole, just in case he gets down there in the deep end and we need to retrieve him. Alright, so we got the camera mounted on him. We also gave him a few minutes to wake back up. Now it's time to take a dive underwater. You can see he's getting bombarded by all the bass, and they're mostly just curious to come up and see what's going on. And this might be overwhelming to a lot of different species, but blue crabs live in the ocean where they see sharks and fish that are much, much bigger than bass all the time. So I don't think this little guy's getting scared. And now we're getting a visit from Spot, our spotted bass. But there is one interesting thing I have to point out. The largemouth bass here in the Mobile Delta do feed on blue crabs, but they're much smaller than this adult-sized blue crab, and they also don't have that big camera attached to the back, so I don't think we'll have to worry about any of them trying to actually eat him. Even the tilapia are stopping by to check him out. But the reason I love this format is because it gives us a completely different look and interaction with the pond. Most of the time I'm filming everything from overhead, or we even have some underwater live stream cameras, but those are typically in a fixed position and don't really give you that experience of living underwater like this camera angle does. It gives you a different depth perception as well as lets you see the contours of the banks and the skyline, which I think is pretty cool. Alright, so up to this point, we hadn't got a lot of movement out of the crab. I'm already starting to regret putting him to sleep just a little bit because he hadn't been very active. So we got a little bit of action out of this crab, but he found a little hiding hole and wanted to post up there with his claws out just to protect himself, which I don't blame him, but we need a blue crab that's going to give us a little bit more energy. So I decided to completely remove all the ice away from the crabs so they would wake up, and I made a deal with them. Whichever crab would explore these ponds for us would be set free after it was over, and earn their freedom and escape the boiling pot. And although this guy only had one pincher, I knew he'd be the perfect one for the job. I could tell right away he was full of energy and feisty, so the only problem I was going to have is figuring out how to strap the camera on him now that he's fully awake. But luckily he only had the one pincher I had to deal with, so I got the camera on him. Now let's head underwater. And right away, I knew this was going to be a different experience when the crab's fully awake. And when those bass swam up to him, he started giving them the 1-2 Mayweather. And he wasn't going to be bullied around. But not only that, this crab had a bigger frame and also had those bigger flappers on the back, which made it easy for him to maneuver around the pond with the camera on. But I found it pretty neat when he got down into the very bottom parts of this pond, which at this point he's about 5 feet deep, but you can see how that sunlight penetrating the water even changes the complexion. But you still have really good visibility down here, and for all you fishermen out there, notice that even at 5 foot deep, you can still see that shoreline and the trees up there on it, which is a pretty cool view. And that kind of lets you see how even though the fish are down deep, in a lot of ponds and lakes, they can see you when you drive over them in a boat, or even standing right there on the banks fishing. That's why it's always important to keep that movement and noise down to a minimum. But this little crab's just scooting along the bottom of the pond. He's got a group of followers, more or less just interested to see what he's doing. But a couple interesting facts about a blue crab is that their typical lifespan is only about 3 years, and they have a really expansive natural habitat, and they're really abundant out here on the east coast around Maryland and also in our Gulf, as well as other countries like the southern coast of Argentina, all the way out to Nova Scotia. And back in the 1940s, they were even seen out in the Mediterranean, and were also once thought of as an invasive species, as they were found in places like Turkey, Italy, Greece, and Israel. But nowadays they're most abundant in places like Maryland and Virginia, as their habitat thrives in brackish waters and salt marshes. And out of all of these places, the blue crab is most celebrated in the Chesapeake Bay. But another interesting fact is that females mate only once, and their mating season is between May and October, and when the female blue crab comes of age, she's only going to mate one time. But in contrast, the male can mate multiple times. But after they mate, the female blue crab can carry as many as 2 million eggs, and those eggs are released into the water where they molt up to 25 times to begin their growth over a period of a few weeks. But blue crabs are not picky eaters, and their diet consists of mostly dead fish, mussels, clams, snails, and in some cases, even smaller blue crabs. But I think we found the perfect crab for this tour because he's full of energy, and he's almost explored the entire pond now, cruising around left to right, and doesn't spend much time hiding. And I like it because he even went to some places that I can't see that often, like up under the dock. Gives me a good opportunity to inspect my wood pilings. And a lot of you guys may be wondering, well, how is the blue crab living in freshwater? Well, this blue crab came from the Mobile Delta, and it's a really unique setup because all of these crabs come out of the ocean, but during the fall, whenever we start getting that cooler weather, the salinity in the water from the ocean actually starts traveling up the rivers. And there's 5 major rivers that flow down into the Mobile Delta, and throughout the fall, you'll start seeing all sorts of saltwater species, like crabs, flounder, redfish, speckled trout, working their way up those river systems. And what you'll find is that some individual species adapt to that fresh water a little bit better than others. And so as that water goes from salt to brackish to freshwater, depending on how well they adapt, determines how farther up north they can travel into these river systems. So a blue crab could easily spend a little while in freshwater, as they do it often in the fall, but it's not something they could survive in throughout an extended period of time. And the little guy finally made it over to the waterfall area. This is something I didn't expect to see. About like you'd expect, a lot of turbulence and not a lot of visibility. Alright, this guy was a good sport and has earned his freedom. Just to show you, he's still alive and healthy. We're about to go release him. Appreciate you giving us a tour of the pond. Alright folks, next up we're going to strap the camera on the tilapia. But before we do that, let's get some updates from around the farm. So even though our farm's in a remote location, staying connected is more important than ever. That's why I'm thankful for today's sponsor, Mint Mobile, for providing premium wireless without a premium price. Mint offers high-speed data, unlimited talk and text, and nationwide coverage, but my personal favorite is no contracts or monthly payments are required. Their plans start out at $15 a month, and you can choose a 3, 6, or 12-month plan. And they're able to offer these low rates because they've simplified the wireless shopping experience with no stores or salespeople. Everything is taken care of online. And feel free to check your area for coverage online, but there's a good chance you're going to be in range because Mint Mobile provides 5G coverage to 98% of Americans and 4G LTE to 99% of Americans. But switching over is easy. You can sign up and activate in minutes with eSIM from the comfort of your own home and keep your existing phone number and contacts when you switch. So these plans include unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network and includes free calling to Mexico, Canada, and the UK. So do me a favor and go check out Mint Mobile by clicking the link in the video description or scanning that QR code. And just like always, when it rains out here, it pours. Well folks, we got about 5 inches of rain last night. And listen to the water going over the drain pipe. It's been 10 hours since it stopped raining. This is about as full as this pond has ever been. And it's still got at least a couple more inches to come down. You can see it flowing out of the overflow pipe right there. That's a lot of water. But we needed it. So that's the normal vertical overflow pipe. And the emergency overflows down here in this corner. We've never had any water go out there. Let's see if it made it up there. So in the event that we ever get too much rain, the pond is designed so that it comes out of this bottom corner right here. And you can see we kind of cut out this emergency overflow ditch and put in that flex mat. But the water made it up right here to the flex mat. Still probably had another inch or two before it would top this and then drain out. It drains down there and back into the woods. But you can see those winter deer plots are looking good after all that rain.
Yeah, them deer are gonna be in here munching on this.
And I always like to see how the animals react to all the rain, because this is the driest time of the year and all of our creeks had almost dried up. And now that we've got some water back in them, the raccoons are down there hunting for crawfish. And the deer are having to cross the creeks again, as we got a spike coming through. And now he turns around and crosses it again. I think he may just be playing in it. And here's a look at our 2 spotted fawns. This may be the first time they've ever had to cross a creek, but luckily for them it wasn't too deep yet. And another pair of fawns out following Mama around during the storm. So although we need that rain to help us fill up the ponds, whenever we get an abundance of it like that, it can cause problems over here at Cedar Falls. Look at all the dirt and mud that it washed into the beach area, and I can even see by looking on the banks that at one point this pond was probably 6 to 10 inches over its normal water level. But the worst part of it is it completely destroys the water visibility. I can barely see the bass down in there, and typically we would have well above 5-foot visibility in this pond. It's almost crystal clear water. And let's walk over here. This is where the water overflows down into the 5-acre pond. And you can see here 10 to 12 hours after the storm, it's still going over the overflow. But look who I spotted right here in this shallow pocket. It's Jake the Snake. Hadn't seen him in a while, but I think he's gotten even bigger. So a lot of you were posting asking about where the live stream link was. Well, the timing of this rainstorm was unfortunate, because not only did it kill all of the visibility in the pond, it also kept us from starting the live streams that we had planned on starting last week. If I would have went live, you would have just seen a screen like this full of mud water and no action. So the live streams have been delayed a bit until the water clarity comes back. And the dirty water is also going to keep us from seeing any underwater clips during feeding time. So we're just going to dump 1,000 golden shiners out right here in this beach area and see how the bass react. I know we're about to get a feeding frenzy. So muddy water doesn't slow these guys down. They always have a big appetite. Alright, we're up here at the wetland filter, checking in on our smallest bass we call Truman. And Truman's getting a little bigger. We may have to consider releasing him in an aquarium, or maybe even the 5-acre pond one day. Got him. So I walked back down here to the pond, and I'm not sure if you can see that, but one of the tilapia has a golden shiner sticking out of his mouth. I've heard they'd eat anything, but I wasn't sure that they would eat a shiner. And the interesting thing about this one, if you look right to the left of that tilapia, you'll see a huge school of tilapia fry. So this is the mother that does the mouth brooding. And it looks like she just took a quick break to snag a golden shiner, and now she's back on her brooding duties. And it looks like these fry may be a little bit bigger than usual, because that looks like a big dark cloud, or either a lot of tilapia fry. And you know what comes after the rains? And that's fog. This is about as foggy as I've ever seen it out here at the pond. It's a big white blanket of fog that even keeps you from seeing all the way across the pond. But you know there's one of them out there waiting on the sun to come out and burn it off. And that's the bald eagle. He sits on that perch on the other side of the pond, and as those feeders go off, he swoops down to try to snag a bluegill or tilapia. And this guy's been pretty unsuccessful lately, and he usually gives 2 attempts per fly down. This time he came up empty-handed on both. Now let's check in on some of the other wildlife at the farm. Look at the size of this armadillo, rooting through the leaves down there in the swamp. Man, that is a thick boy. Now here's something you don't see that often. A hawk captured on the swamp cameras. Not sure if he was chasing a little mouse or just stopping by the creek to get a drink, but the crows are alerting everyone. And here we got a pair of baby raccoons. I've enjoyed watching them run around from one end of the farm to the other. My best guess is they're twin boys, because most of the time they're wrestling and flipping over each other. And here we got one of the baby deer struggling to keep up with the mama. And another good daytime sighting of the spotted one. And then giving mama a kiss on the nose. But it looks like the mother senses danger somewhere. So as that cold weather moves through, we typically start seeing more and more of these guys that I don't like to see hanging around, and that's a cormorant. These guys are fish-eating machines, and luckily it's a single, because if you ever have a group of them fly into your pond, they can do some damage quick. So I was walking out on the dock and I spotted a big bird out on the island, and look at Mr. Longneck hanging out there on Alcatraz Island. But the interesting thing about this is that usually, as soon as a blue heron spots a human, they fly off, but this guy doesn't seem to mind my presence at all. It almost makes me wonder if something's wrong with him. So I just got one of my bass replica mounts back from the taxidermist, and I wanted to show all you fishermen out there that at this day and age, there's never a reason to keep and kill a fish to get it mounted. Because like I did with this replica mount, you can take a photo and the measurements, and a taxidermist can completely recreate that fish. So release that fish and let them grow older, as these replica mounts are the way to go. So we're going to be adding a delivery of adult golden shiners into the pond next week. And as I scan across the pond, you'll see a lot of sunken brush piles and structure in places for them to hide out. But I had an idea about creating a new type of structure that I wanted to tell you guys about. And it's almost like creating an underwater forest that gives these bait fish a place to hide out. So I thought about taking some trees, this size or smaller, and putting groups of them throughout the pond. And I've done something similar in the past where I sank them on their side. But for this idea, I want to stand them up vertically so that maybe the top 2 or 3 foot of the tree is sticking out of the water, but the bulk of the tree would be beneath the water. And then if I grouped 3 or 4 of them together in an area, I think it would provide the perfect hideout for some of these bait fish. And over the years, we've put dozens of trees in here and laid them down horizontally. And the interesting thing is that a couple of them had branches sticking up out of the water, and they got enough sunlight that they were able to grow and create a root system and develop into a bush or tree right here on the edge of the pond. And I know a lot of you guys are going to be saying that's a bad idea, and I kind of agree with you. But just from the looks of it, it looks like they have a shallow root system right there beneath the water that doesn't go very deep. But that old oak piece is one of the few vertical pieces of structure we have in this pond. But you guys tell me what you think. Would you like to see the forest idea of stacking a bunch of trees vertical? And if so, leave any ideas on how you think we should go about adding that structure. One idea I had is putting a tree in a 30-gallon pot and filling the pot up with cement, or using a weighted pallet as a base, potentially with some 2x4s braced up against the tree to help keep them upright. So leave any comments you have about this idea below. We'll try to make that happen next week. Alright, now it's time to feed Bubba the shrimp, our jumbo freshwater prawn. And I've always been amazed whenever it's feeding time because they use those 6 little legs beneath them to quickly grab all that food. But this week I was even more impressed when I stopped and realized that the eyes on these prawns are on the top of their head. So I find it very impressive at how fast they're able to find these protein pellets, just feeling around blindly. My guess is that it's a texture thing, probably also aided by smell, but those pellets are sitting right there on tiny rocks that can't feel that much different than the hard pellet. So I don't know, I just found it even more impressive once I realized they're collecting them all basically blind. So luckily right before the storm I was able to feed the tiger bass, and we're going to be seeing some incredible topwater shots today from all of the bass. We got the smallmouth bass, the spotted bass, the group of aggressive tiger bass, and even the tilapia. But I wanted to share something with you that I learned about pond management, because each year as these ponds get older and older, you'll start encountering some things you didn't see when the ponds were just getting started. And one of the biggest things I've noticed by pit tagging all of our bass and collecting that data and then looking at their weights and growth throughout the year is that most of these bass don't follow a linear scale when it comes to gaining weight. You know, we've always known that bass gain a lot of weight during the spring and the spawn, and then they lose it right after that from laying the eggs and all those stresses that are associated with the spawn. And then sometime around the summertime they'll pick that weight back up. But for me, since I catch these fish every week throughout the year, now that we've gotten 3 years worth of data, I can sample things at a much smaller time frame, for instance even week to week. And although it may just be a few ounces, a lot of times I'll see that the majority of the fish in the pond are gaining weight or losing weight. But what I've noticed here most recently in this 3rd year is now we have 3 different generations of bass in this pond, which require 3 different sizes of bait fish. Because as you can imagine, a bass that weighs a half a pound is going to target a different size bait than one of these 6 or 7 pounders. So as a pond owner, once you start collecting this data, you need to group your different generations of fish and use them to tell you what types of bait you have an abundance of, and also the type of bait you may be lacking. But that also becomes a little tricky because throughout the year, the bait fish change sizes. So in the spring, a threadfin shad's going to be small and most likely targeted by that 1st generation bass, but in the fall they're mature adults and can pretty much be eaten by any 3 of the generations. So the best tool that I found is to watch those relative weights for that particular generation of bass. So if a lot of the bass in the 0 to 2 pound range aren't hitting that 100% relative weight, that would tell me I needed to add a bunch of smaller bait fish in the pond. And on the opposite hand, if those 3rd generation bass aren't continuing to grow, we would need some of those bigger bait resources like the big bluegills, fully grown prawns, tilapia, or adult golden shiners. But to clue you guys in on a little bit of a cheat code that I found, there's one particular bait fish out there that seems to feed all 3 generations of bass, and that's these large adult golden shiners that we're going to be stocking next week. And we've only stocked these twice in this pond, but each time we add them, you'll see topwater explosions across the entire pond. And you'll see fish that range from a half a pound all the way up to 6 pounds just going airborne chasing them out of the water. And the biggest difference that makes these adult golden shiners different than all the other bait types is their long and slender profile. And because they're long and skinny, that also allows that 1 pound largemouth to eat it. So just for an example, Say you had a 10-ounce bluegill and a 10-ounce golden shiner. Well, a 1-pound bass wouldn't be able to eat that bluegill, but there's a good chance he could eat that golden shiner because of its long, skinny shape. So a lot of you guys are probably thinking, why don't you just add adult golden shiners all year long? Well, that's the problem. Most of the hatcheries have to grow these shiners to get them to an adult size, and then they travel much better during the cooler months out of the year. So most of your fish trucks will start delivering from the fall up until you reach the spring. So last year we got 1 delivery in November and 1 delivery in March. And it's the one time that I'll see the weights go up for all 3 generations of fish across the board. So my plan this year is to try to create some more underwater structure and things like these underwater forests and places for these shiners to hide so that enough of them will survive and they can start reproducing. But a shiner needs a lot of grassy area to spawn in, so we won't have an abundance of them, but we may have just enough to keep a population of them sustained. Man, I sure do love watching these topwater blow-ups, and at the end I always have to go back and take a few still shots and freeze those frames that I think are really cool. And check that out, that bass has a shiner right there in the center of his mouth. Alright, now it is time to steam some crabs. And the last time we did this, we had several of our East Coast followers recommend that I try out a seasoning called JO No. 2. This is something that's very popular with the Marylanders out on the East Coast. And while I think we have a great recipe, I'm always open to trying a new one. So we're just going to add a little bit of seasoning to about 1 inch of water. But the one thing I'm always going to do different than the Marylanders is we pop the shells off and clean our crabs first. Then bring the water to a boil, add the crabs in, put some more of the JO No. 2 seasoning on it. And keep in mind, folks, this is steaming crabs, not boiling them. So you just want to cover the lid, and when you see the water start boiling again and the steam coming out of the top, start a 7-minute timer. And when your timer's up, the crabs are done, and you've got a bunch of lump crab meat to sit back and enjoy. Pair that up with a few Gulf shrimp and some cedar plank salmon, and that's a prime ocean cuisine. But guys, don't think I forgot to release the one that earned his freedom. He's still just as feisty as ever, but I think we're going to call this guy Columbus for helping us explore the depths of our ponds. He did a good job and wasn't intimidated by those bass and gave us a full tour. So I hope you enjoy your freedom, Columbus. Just watch out for all those crab traps out there, because there's a bunch of them. So each time I fly the drone over the pond here recently, I'm amazed at all the big adult tilapia that we have now. About half of them are really easy to spot because they're completely white, and they've all taken up homes near the feeders, as there's a limited amount of algae in the pond now and they're starting to feed pretty heavily on the protein pellets. I thought it would be a perfect opportunity to catch one of them and add the camera onto it so it could be a little workhorse here in the 5-acre pond and help us do a little exploring over here. And so I got a salmon egg rigged up on a hook. Let's see if we can catch one. It's going to be about 50-50 whether you catch a bluegill or a tilapia right now. So we started with the bluegill. Got him. What is this? Look at that. Caught a bass on a pellet. I can't believe that. Bass are eating these pellets. Oh, that bass just bit the cork. These fish are hungry. Got him. There we go. We'll see if he's big enough to take the camera around. He's not the biggest one we've got out here, but he might work. Alright, so not exactly how we wanted to mount the camera. We got to go vertical with this just because of the shape of the tilapia. Let's give it a shot. And he's off. Right now, he just swam right down to the bottom. You probably can't see the line. He's starting to go that way. So unfortunately, it's overcast and the water's still dirty from all the rain. So anything we get to see today is just going to be a little bonus footage in my mind. But right away, you can see he's kind of teaming up with some of his other tilapia buddies. Then he's made it over to some sort of structure pile. Doesn't quite look like the oak throne. Maybe just one of those piles we sank. Another group of fish. Looks like tilapia. And another tilapia playing peekaboo with him. And the tough thing about tilapia is they look like a lot of other fish. They look a lot like a carp. And at some angles even look similar to a largemouth. So sometimes I have to see the full shape of it to know for sure it's a tilapia. But now he's swimming down there on the bottom. And that was for sure a tilapia. Man, look at that big fish and mouth. So not nearly as much excitement on this adventure. But there's a nice bright blue tilapia. Got the little fawns and Mama coming out to take a sip of the pond water this afternoon. Alright, we got 5 inches of rain last night, so we're about to do some fishing and tag some of these fish and also scan the ones we catch to see how big they've gotten. But look at that. The duck house got blown. It's been sitting over there for about the last half year.
and it got blown all the way over here to the dock in that storm. And sometimes when we get a lot of fresh water, it'll put these fish into a little bit of a feeding frenzy. So I'm not really sure what pattern they're going to be on today. We'll try a few different things out. Oh, that feels pretty good. He's running right at the bank. Look at him. Oh yeah, nice one. That's a good one. They're eating good today. Wow, so no tag on this fish. That's pretty incredible. This is easily a 3-pounder that's never been caught before. Wow. All right, his new tag is going to be 32779, weighing in at 3.41 pounds. Can't believe we never seen you before.
All right, folks, we need a name for this fish, and it's going to start with a P, but you can also see we need names for I, K, M, N, O, and Q. But you're really going to want to get the P name, because the last time I caught a fish that weighed over 3 pounds, the very first time I ever caught it, was a little old fish named Junebug, weighing in at 3.37 pounds. And when we caught her during the survey, she was the biggest fish in the pond, weighing 6.72 pounds. So fish like this have those perfect genetics to grow into those trophy 10-pound bass.
Got him. Running out deep. Ooh, that's a big splash. I didn't get to see him good though. Nice one. Nice solid fish. A little pale. All right, this fish has been caught. 33540, weighing in at 3.10 pounds.
All right, this fish is named Finley, and it's the 3rd time we've caught her on a variety of different baits and all across the pond.
Got him. Nice one. Might have been caught before. He has not been caught before. We'll add a tag to him. And his new tag is going to be 32706. Alright, this guy weighs 2.09, 2.07 pounds.
All right, this is another fish that has not been caught, and his name is going to start with a Q. And hopefully you guys can comment enough names below we can complete this list out today.
There we go. That feels like a good one. Oh yeah. Nice one. Right out there where she's supposed to be. All right, this one's been caught 571506, weighing in at 2.79 pounds.
And this fish is named Maximus. And hey, look at there, it's the first time he's ever been caught by something other than a Junebug worm.
Ooh, there we go. Oh, he got me hung. Get out of there. Got him. That was a close one. Him in that little shrub pile. Got a little belly on him. All right, this guy's been caught. 32611, weighing in at 2.16 pounds.
And this is a young fish named Hoss, but it's already the 3rd time we've caught it this year. It's an aggressive one. And hey, look at there, we got some fan mail that got sent in. This little kitten enjoys watching the videos. And those prawns. Alright, Liz's garden is coming to an end this year. Here's one last look at those wildflowers she planted. But she's cutting the remaining buds off of them and is going to reuse the seeds to plant next year. And you can tell the butterflies enjoyed it. It's pretty much turned into a butterfly garden because there's almost one on every flower right now. She even picked out a bouquet for Sarah. Good job, Liz. But today we got the chief gardener out here. He decided to hop up here in the planters and do some stress tests and get things cleaned out for next year. And after that, it's time for a little joyride out around the pond. And you can see he's had a long, hard day out here on the farm. Collecting pumpkins is tough work. But if you made it this far in the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and follow along with all the ponds, fish, and wildlife out here at the farm. Hope you all enjoyed this one, and we will see you next time.